Welcome to Crash Course in Commercial Real Estate. We converted our in-house training program to a podcast to teach you prospecting, negotiation, business planning, and other fundamental skills to become a successful commercial real estate agent. And now, here's your host, Brady Collier.
All right, welcome back. I'm excited about this episode. And this episode is residential real estate sales versus commercial real estate sales or brokerage. And so this is one that I think is interesting because almost all of us have experience with residential real estate. So Shannon, what's your experience with residential real estate sales?
Buying a house.
Okay, you've bought a house. Have you ever sold one?
I have sold a house too.
So you've listed a house with
Yes.
a listing broker?
Yes.
Did the same person help you buy your next home?
No, I'm trying to think. No, because we moved states, so we had a different
states. So you had multiple experiences, exposures to residential real estate.
Yes.
And then before the last 3 weeks, have you had any exposure to commercial real estate?
Before the last 3 weeks, no.
Okay.
No exposure to commercial.
All right. So if this is the very first episode you're joining us, I'm Brady Collier. I'm a commercial real estate broker in Lubbock, Texas. And our subject matter expert guest speaker for the day is Dan Williams. Dan and I have been friends since, when did you start in the real estate business?
2006, January.
Okay, so in 2006, Dan and I, we were working at the same company at the time, great company, and we were there. I was there for several years, and Dan was too, and we played on a company basketball team together.
Yeah,
Dan was
scars to prove it.
Scars to prove it. Dan was a basketball player. I was not. I was
BJ
terrible.
Walters. Courtesy of that, buddy.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
So we've known each other since 2006. And so, Dan, if you don't mind, give us a little bit of your history in the real estate business, how you got into the business, and then your experience through residential. And this isn't brief, couple of minutes. And then if you could say how you transitioned, and now you do both residential and commercial,
Yes.
if I understand correctly.
Yes, that is correct. So my start was answering a Monster.com ad for real estate that I thought was a salary job for CRBC. And so I answered that ad, came up, interviewed, and started in residential sales pretty quick after a few interviews. And started residential there. Spent about 5 years at that brokerage.
Now, tell me about how you did in the early days of your residential. I remember my rookie year. I was fresh out of grad school.
Yeah.
I signed on. Duron Tucker trained me. Amazing experience for me.
Yes.
I was 22. I dove in, and just out of grad school, I remember selling a good number of houses. It wasn't a good fit for me. I was never going to be great at it. I was always going to be pretty good, but not great. What was your experience like there?
Yeah, so started in 2006, right before the crash. But it was, in my opinion, it was probably a great time to be starting. One, I didn't have a family. So I could work as many hours.
Dan married the receptionist at our company.
Boom.
We just started noticing Dan migrating up there to the front desk at the company.
Yeah.
We had this super cute little blonde girl answering the phone, sweet as she could be. And next thing we know, they're engaged.
Boom, married.
Well done, bro.
Yeah. So here I am. Met her about the same time I met you. So, so I started in sales there. And I think first year sold 37 houses or something, 36, 37 houses. I was doing only residential. It was probably a great time. I was about the same age, 21, 22. And so it was good timing just market-wise because there was a lot of incentives for first-time home buyers. There was credits. You could do 100% loans back then. You could literally put up $500,000 of earnest money and get it back at closing. The market was different. I think I heard you talk earlier. The market was definitely different than from how you got your start. Because a lot of our business came from floor calls, which calls would come into the company. We were just getting Blackberries and Palm Trios and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I'm sure people
Most
get
of
a
the young
kick out
kids
of
out there
They're
have
like,
no idea what a trio
what's
is.
a Palm
Blackberry,
Trio?
is that fruit?
Yeah, so we were just getting that kind of stuff. So the technology was totally different. You didn't really have your cell phone out there everywhere. Not as much as we do now. So, so I got my business started by open house. Started up a lot of relationships. That's kind of how my business, and I'm sure we'll probably talk on that kind of But it's yeah, we really just kind of got the ball rolling pretty quick. I mean, I was one of the few young people. I think the average realtor was was a female in late 50s when I started. So it's so we were kind of some of the first few young people that Coldwell Banker hired, about 5 or 6 people at the same time. And I feel like we were some of the first few young people that kind of got started. I mean, you were probably just right before me, right?
Yeah, I started in 2002 in the
2.
residential side,
Okay.
jumped to commercial in 2004.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then you was part of the reason that you left Coldwell is a great company, but part of the reason was because you got commercial opportunities and couldn't fulfill them, so you went to a company that allowed you to do both.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Changed over to a company. So it was about 5 years at Coldwell Banker, and then changed to Westmark for one of the primary purposes was the ability to both do residential and commercial.
And then how long were you at Westmark, and then you jumped out and started your own company?
Yeah, so I was about 6 years at Westmark, and then in March of 2017 started up our real estate company.
Good.
Yeah.
And so now what percentage of your business, and there's no right or wrong answer there, what percentage of your business, if you look back over since 2017, since you started, it was a lot of residential, and then now you do some commercial, some residential? Can you guess a percentage?
Yeah, so I would probably say 60-65% residential, and then the rest is commercial. Transactions are totally different in how they're structured. But yeah, your commercial deals are usually a little bit larger, but much more time consuming on an individual deal. But
Okay, so now we're going to jump into, because you're going to have a ton of people say, oh, you're in real estate, and they're going to want to talk to you about their house. Our company, with our license with NAI, we can only sell commercial real estate, so you'll never sell a house, probably, in your entire career. You'll refer those out to other people. Let's talk about the big differences, because when people think about Shannon, they think about the 27 residential realtors that they know. So let's clarify for Shannon differences between the business itself, because they're both, they require the same license from the state of Texas Real Estate Commission, same licensing process, but it's almost like a completely different occupation at times. And you're one of the few guys I know that does residential deals and commercial deals successfully and at a level of competency, which is why I invited you to come on and talk to this. So can you characterize some things that you feel like are different, very different between residential and commercial?
Yeah. I mean, going back to kind of the start of it, it really started around the fact that I wanted to buy some commercial stuff. And so that's where, and I think you learn so much through doing a transaction yourself. And that's where, if you've never bought a house, it's really hard to go sell a house. Mm-hmm. If you've never had your baked good at your bakery, it's really hard to go pitch somebody on, oh, you really have to have this because I don't know anything about it. That's why you should, So I think that's where it kind of got started. And so
you needed a place to invest the money you were making through all your commission sales because you're an unmarried guy who's selling a lot of houses.
Yeah, true.
That's great.
True. Yeah, and so I love the investment side of things, and that's kind of how you transitioned, I think, from, you start in, and it starts with some duplexes.
That's right.
And then it starts with, oh, man, there's a quad over here that this is really a pretty cool little deal, so I should probably get into that. Or, or you get that call that, like Brady said, you get those relationships with somebody that wants to do both, or they need your help to do residential. And that's what's kind of cool about a brokerage, that you can say, hey, we just do commercial, right? Now I can go make my relationships with residential agents, and then you can get referral business
back and forth.
Both directions there. So, but yeah, the difference between a residential and a commercial transaction is pretty stark. Yeah, I mean, so like residential to me is, and that's probably why there's 1,600 residential agents in Lubbock, Texas, and there's probably how many commercial? Less than 100 that were. Yeah. I mean, there's less than
40,
probably
maybe
30 that
in our market
that are
active.
That are active. And so I think that's where the transaction itself. So the residential is pretty cut and paste. You can kind of come and do the same thing over and over. I think there's variations of the ability to value a house, to then go to understanding how the appraisal actually works, and being able to fight for your client on a certain issue. And then you go to a commercial transaction where there's no real two properties that are the exact same.
That's a great point. And then I think he's right on. With a residential sale, after you've sold 50 or 100 houses, he started at 36, and then, what now would you do in a year on the number of transactions residential?
Number of transactions, oh, that's a great question.
50 to 100?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Okay, so
usually somewhere in that 75 to 100 transactions.
75 to 100 transactions. And the average commercial broker is going to do way fewer transactions. They're going to be way larger, but there's way fewer of them. But of those 50 to 75, the variance between each transaction, it's very little. The same process of the listing is the same. Working with our agents on the showings is pretty much the same. When you go out and show property, you're going to put them in your car, you're going to drive, and you become more efficient over time.
Yeah.
But
we
the
have a
actual
single
process is pretty much the same every single time.
Yeah, and we have a single source for information.
The multiple listing service.
Yeah, we have the MLS for all of your information. It houses everything from your listings to your sales. Now there is off-market stuff in this market, especially that happens, but in commercial, there's no single source. There may be companies over here that don't put it on anything.
Yes.
They may put a sign out, and that sign sits there for 2 years, and it's never been on a website.
And I would say that the 2 years, that's a great point I didn't have in my notes. The MLS and the flow of information is radically different between these two businesses, but also the time horizon. What would you say is the average from the time you list a house in today's market to the time the house is, you're at the title company, closed, you're shaking hands, and you're going down the road? What's the total time?
Yeah, in 2021 market, total time for a house, you're 45 to 60 days probably.
45 to 60 days. And on your average commercial, take the last 5 years, your average commercial deal, how long was that process from the time you listed it to the time you closed it? And let's just talk listings.
Let's talk listings on land sales, because I just closed a piece of land that I've had on the market since I was at Westmark in 2015.
Okay, so that's
And
6 years.
Just closed on it. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
60 days versus 6 years is like the gestation of a rabbit versus an elephant when it comes to the length of the time you're working on it. And you got to stay faithful. You got to be in contact with that person. So people in the residential industry become enamored. Whoa, you closed a $4 million piece of land. Whoa, I want to be in commercial. Yeah, in the 6 years that I've had this $4 million listing, you know, if you're closing 75 deals a year, if you look at the total volume there, it's not always just roses on commercial. And some things like timing, you got to be really patient and work for a long time.
Yeah. That's a great point. I mean, I think the commercial transactions, it just takes so much longer, and there's so much unique qualities to each property. I mean, no two pieces of land are going to be, realistically, there's not many that are going to be just alike and have the same issues and have the same user that needs to use this type of, this type of zoning, and this guy's going to put X amount of square feet on this property.
And this
kind
is
of
a retail land, and this is apartment land, and this is office land, and this is hotel land, and all of those have different requirements. And just talk with a hotel person versus a multifamily person versus office versus retail, and not look not look ignorant.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of education to be able to talk intelligently on behalf of the client who listed the land. And so I would say the total body of knowledge, when we're comparing and contrasting the two professions, on residential, the body of knowledge is pretty compact. On commercial, it's pretty vast. There's a whole lot of information to be a valuable resource for your clients. Would you agree with that?
Correct. Yeah. And I think there's a lot that take the approach of just kind of a hands off and like, I'm going to leave that on the client commercially. I see that more, maybe like I see that more. I see that pretty often of like, hey, it's your role to figure out what you can put on the land, but just depending on how your clients are relationally, or if you're representing, corporation XYZ that's bought and sold, thousands of properties across the country, it's a different deal when you're dealing with, Dr. Williams over here, and Dr. Williams has, wants to expand his practice, and he wants you to walk him through literally every part of the process.
Yeah. So let's use that as a transition. We talked a little bit about the difference in the industry. And so I say that because a lot of people watching our residential agents maybe who want to make a jump into commercial, that jump's actually a lot more difficult than one would expect, just because the body of knowledge. But let's talk about the attributes of the person. In your mind, if you could just put a very successful residential agent and a very successful commercial agent, sometimes, such as yourself, that could be the same person. But whenever I stereotypically make caricatures of those two persons, sometimes they can be very different. We think of our mutual coworker, Scott Womack, very successful commercial agent. I don't think he'd be a great residential agent, but his personality really works well in the commercial space. Yeah. He's an expert. He's resourceful. He's Johnny on the spot. He works really hard. Residential, his wife sells residential, and she's very successful. But I don't know that if they swap positions, they would be. So could you speak a little bit to the type of person that you think is very successful normally in residential and some attributes, and then contrast that with commercial.
Yeah, I think it comes down to your client on the transaction, right? Of how you help them and how you can be successful in that, and how doing good for them, is also going to be good for you, right? But the emotions are different. The emotions of a residential transaction versus the emotions of a commercial transaction. So your commercial transaction, most of the emotions are removed from that. There's not now on occasion you
Except
get
pride and anger. Those are the two emotions that surface in every commercial transaction.
So you get that guy like, well, I mean, I need this, like, it is pride. You see that more, and you see it in residential, but there's a lot more emotions when it's my house and I need to move in, and my kid needs to be going to this school, and my wife doesn't want to stay another night in a hotel, and you need to get me into that house tomorrow. Whatever it may be, there's a lot more emotions when it comes to a residential transaction. And I think the person that can handle that, you go into your, I was at a lunch today and we were talking about Enneagrams, and, you're talking about like the type that you are of, how you can handle the emotions within that transaction. And I think that can make somebody successful in either direction of, I would say, I'm just a problem solver when it comes to that stuff. And so it's helped me to be somebody that can do maybe both without having, getting my emotions wrapped up in the transaction. And so that's, I would say that's probably the biggest thing that I see the difference in the person. You're a person that is, we have some great, that's why you probably see so many former school teachers, that are in residential side, because emotionally they can work with the wife that's going through these things, and they can talk through that. But I will say, I don't think it's hard to say that anybody's built to be perfect with this emotionally. Yeah. I just think that's a big part of it, and that's probably why I'm harping on that.
Let me run a few more by you and see if you agree or disagree.
Yeah.
Which one would you characterize as more detail-oriented? Commercial agent, residential agent?
Commercial.
I'd say commercial agents need to be a more detail-oriented person, because the commercial transaction is long, it's involved, there's a lot of steps there. Yeah. And on residential, you can get by with less detail orientation. How about relationships?
That goes to there's a reason why there's a critical dates list on a commercial transaction, and there's not one on a residential transaction.
The dates are so short, everybody can remember it. But on a commercial transaction, there's a lot of dates that are happening there. What about relational? Talk about, I was okay in residential, but I got worn out by the amount of people time in the car and so on and so forth. Yeah. I was energized sitting at a desk, prospecting on the phone, doing my transactions. There was time I knew somebody wanted to sell an apartment, somebody wanted to buy an apartment. I put the two together. The manager showed the apartment. I never went and saw either one of them face to face. I was perfectly happy I didn't go to the title company for closing, but I put the whole deal together on the phones, and that's been a lot of my experience in commercial. A lot of phone time, but not as much face-to-face time as residential.
Yeah. I would say that is an accurate statement. I mean, when you're showing houses and you're going to go show 6-7 properties, or sometimes we show 13, 15 properties in a day, in a half of a day, when somebody's coming and moving into your town. And so and the pressure's really on to make sure that you're going to find something. But I think that kind of tell me where we're trying to harp on again here. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I was just saying that residential, you got to have a real high tolerance for face-to-face. You got to be able to sit in that car and be social for 5 hours and not get tired of being social. Yeah. Commercial, you're on to the next. Within that same 5 hours, you're dealing on 7 different transactions with 7 different people, and it's all on the phone. It's just very different. The nature of the work is very different.
Yeah, we did a lease on a 30,000 square foot space, and we spent 15 minutes in the building.
Yeah, showing. The showing was 15 minutes.
The showing was 15 minutes long, and we didn't have to talk about all these other things, and we didn't ride in the car together for a day. We may socialize together, and we go play golf, or we
You didn't have to position all their furniture in the living room with them and so on and so forth.
It's a little bit different. I think
offense to everybody positioning furniture in the living room.
I do think that there's some similarities in the business that can make both sides successful. So commercial has less competition from an agent perspective. And so we're talking about the detail oriented side of things. And so I think that I do see that lacks in commercial, where, they don't come into people's offices when they're taking pictures and tell them like, hey, let's get this looking in a position. Because at the end of the day, like in a market like Lubbock, it's a smaller market. Not every client, and that's going to come down to what is your brokerage setup style, So like ours, we don't do dollar for dollar. We don't have those relationships. We don't have all of the big corporations around that we're dealing with on a just over the phone, and we may never meet them in person, or the only time we may meet them is at a conference or whatever. So ours is the local doctor, the
You're talking about the nature of your commercial transactions.
Yeah. I mean, so our commercial transactions are even different than probably what mine are than what yours are.
Right.
Just because you deal with a corporation that has a bunch of people making a decision. Or something along those lines. So I think that the detail sides of things can come into play on anything. And I think the more detailed you are in whatever side it is, the better you're going to be for your client, the more money you're going to make for your client, the more that you're going to pay attention to the fact that they don't need to be doing that. And you think this is going to be better for them, even though it may make you less money, but you do something better for them that in the long run, relationally, pays off.
There's no
tenfold.
doubt. There's no doubt that there's a ton of things that are the same about the business relationship businesses. Care for the client first. I mean, so a lot of those things, a lot of those core things are the same. But then there's some super fundamental differences. Have you sold many houses outside of Lubbock County? What percentage of your homes have you?
Many. Very, very few.
Less than 1%.
Yeah, over the career,
Over your career,
yeah.
less than 1%. So it's very geographically tight. You become an expert in one market, and that's it. Whereas within commercial, you become an expert in a property type, and that there's no variance between that property type in Georgia and Texas. It's the same fundamentals of demographics and traffic and density and so on and so forth.
Right.
But residential is very geographically limited. It's very tight geographically. So that's a fundamental difference in the business.
I've definitely recently, in 3 weeks, I've become familiar with Longview, Texas, and Temple, Texas, and Tyler, Texas. And so I feel like I'm all over the place in Texas.
And that's the nature of the commercial, of many commercial real estate agents' work. So those are a few differences, comparisons, contrasts between residential and commercial. We could talk about this for forever because they're very different businesses, but I think that's a good amount for today. Any other questions for Dan the man while we've got him here?
No, I don't.
All right.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me
joining
on.
us.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.